Good evening. I want to welcome everyone. This is Craig Uden, cow-calf feedlot operator in South Central Nebraska. And currently, I serve as your president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I'm pleased to welcome you tonight. The first is a series of webinars focused on genetic selection that we are proud to be partnering on with the eBeef cattle genetics team. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen, and at the end of presentations, the team will answer as many questions as time will allow. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org. The webinar tonight, Fake News, EPDs Don't Work, will be led by Dr. Matt Spangler, Associate Professor and Extension Beef Genetics Specialist at the University of Nebraska, and Dr. Alison Van Eenennam, Extension Genetics Specialist at UC Davis, and I believe we will start off tonight with Alison. Alison?
That's right. Thank you, Craig, and thank you to NCBA for partnering with us in this endeavor, and welcome to the audience. So we're going to try a little bit of interactive work here. So I'm just going to try to get to the next slide here. All right, that's the way we have to go. Sorry, it's not letting me advance to the next slide. It did in practice. There we go. Okay. I think I'm there. So yeah, this is a partnership between NCBA and eBeef, and I'll talk a little bit about eBeef. Basically, it's a group of 6 geneticists that have got together to try to put out information around beef cattle breeding. And this is a series of 4 seminars that we're going to be doing. This is the first of the 4, and we were titled it Fake News, EPDs Don't Work, because that's a fake fact, and I hope that as we go through this we could talk a little bit about EPDs. And we've got this set up to be interactive, and I'm just going to walk you through how you can participate in the polls that we're going to do. So we're going to give you a series of questions, and you can say whether it's true or false. So you can say whether it's true or fake. So basically the way to play is you have to grab your phone, and you have to text the letters EPDs to the number 22333. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to do that. So you want to text, that's the little green box on the top of an iPhone, or green looking, I don't know what that is, text message. Text EPDs to the number 22333. And when you logged in, you should receive a text message back that says you've joined the NCBA meeting session. I'm going to give you a moment to log in, and then what will happen is once you've done that once, then it's just like a text conversation, and when I put up a slide and you respond, we're going to get that your response, and so we can kind of see what everybody's thinking is the answer to these questions. So the instructions will be on the slide as well, but I just wanted everyone to get through that, find their phones and get through that piece of it. So as people join in, I might repeat those instructions a little bit. I'll kind of keep my eye on how many people are joining as we go along. So hopefully a number of you have mastered that, and we'll go to the next slide. Still having trouble getting that to work. I don't know why that's not. Okay, so here's our first poll, and what you can see there is 4 pictures of dogs, And I would like for you to tell me which of those 4 dogs you think belongs to Matt Spangler. So if you think it's the first one, you would text A. If you think it's the second one, you would B. If you think it's the third one, you would text C. And if you think it's the fourth one, you would text D. I'm going to give you just a little bit of time here to get your answers in. I can see already that 47 of you have responded, and I think we've got around about 187 registered at the moment. So for those that might have just now joined, what you need to do to participate in these polls is you need to text EPDs to the phone number 22333, and you should get a response back saying you've joined this webinar. And then once you get that response back, then you can type in your answer here of either A, B, C, or D, depending upon which of those 4 dogs you think belongs to Matt Spangler. So I see 85 results have come in to date. I'm going to wait 1 minute longer just for those of you that might have joined, and see if we can get up to 100 here. I personally have a favourite as to which I think these dogs, I will give you a little bit of background actually on these dogs. So one of these dogs belongs to Matt Spangler. One of these dogs belongs to John Pollock. One of these dogs belongs to Bob Weber, and one of these dogs belongs to myself. So you can only answer which one you think belongs to Matt, but once I've revealed the results, I'll tell you who belongs to whom. So, okay, I'm going to, at this stage, uncover the results of the poll, and we'll see what the results were. Okay, well, some of you know Matt, but the majority got that answer correct. The John Pollock's was number A. My dog was number C, and I guess nobody thought that you would have my dog, Matt. I'm not sure what that means, but that's a good thing. And then 28% thought that you should have actually been having Bob Weber's dog. So, okay, let's move on to the next slide. So, okay, now we get to the serious part, now that everybody knows how to work technology. This is a true-false question, and basically the question is, it's important to consider adjusted phenotypes in sire selection because the animal's own record is not included in their EPD. If you think that's true, then you should push A. If you think it's false, then you should push B. So it's important to consider adjusted phenotypes in sire selections because an animal's own record is not included in their EPD. All right. Let's see how we did here. Go and uncover that. And the majority of you, in fact, did get it correct, but we had a number there, 35%, that thought that that should be considered, and that's actually not correct. And the reason for that is that in an EPD is considered the animal's pedigree, the animal's performance or its own record, and possibly progeny if it's an older animal that has progeny performance. So an EPD, the expected progeny difference, is an estimate of the genetic merit of future progeny based on an individual's pedigree, its own performance, and the performance of its progeny. And so an animal's own performance is actually combined and properly weighted for the contemporary group that it's in and the any environmental impacts that might have affected it, along with the performance of its relatives and all genetic relationships to generate an EPD. And really, EPDs are the best estimate we have for how a bull or cow's future progeny will perform on average compared to another bull or cow, or the breed average for a given trait. And so many producers mistakenly place emphasis on raw measurements or adjusted phenotypes rather than the EPD. And the EPD has already got that information incorporated. And it's been shown that selection based on EPDs, or what's going to be passed on to the animal, is about 5 to 9 times more accurate than selection based on index performance or ratios. And so basically, selection based on raw phenotypes, such as actual weights or corrected weights, is a measurement not really of the genetic potential of the animal, but it also includes environmental influences like herd and year and season and management. And that can really impact that number, but it's not something that's transmitted to the progeny. And so that's why it's important to really focus selection only on the EPDs itself. So I want to just give a little bit of background now to e-beef, because a lot of the information we're going to cover in this series of 4 seminars is actually covered at the e-beef website. So if you write this down, it's basically ebeef.org, or you can just Google it, basically. And what you can see here is a page will come up on a thing called e-extension that talks about what e-beef is. And you can see our webinars are listed on this page, and also a range of fact sheets and videos and frequently asked questions. And what we've got there is information that would be of interest to people interested in cattle breeding. And in the fact sheets, this is a listing, if you click on that fact sheets link, that shows all of the different fact sheets that we've put together. They've all been reviewed by us to make sure that they're all actually objective information and not fake news. And you can see there, there's ones that are associated with EPDs and definitions, getting started with DNA testing, how to collect samples, parentage testing, how DNA will affect the accuracy of EPD information, and single gene testing, and even one there down the bottom on new technologies like gene editing. And so we're constantly doing new fact sheets, and we welcome anyone that goes to this site. If you want to type in a question or request a new fact sheet, we're very open to doing new ones as we get requests. And so basically one of the ones we're covering tonight is this fact sheet, and this is what it would look like when you click on the link for EPD basics and definitions. Not surprisingly, you see it's written by Matt Spangler, who's our second speaker in the series here. And it's basically readable as a web-based page, as you can see there. Or, and this might be of interest to anyone that would like to print out a printable PDF version if you'd rather have a paper copy. And that basically is what we're going to be covering tonight, is some of the information that's covered in that particular fact sheet. So let's have a look at EPDs and how EPDs should be used. Okay, so this is a table of trait EPDs, and they're kind of broken down by colors into general classes of traits. The first set of traits are to do with growth and growth attributes of the offspring. The second are kind of maternal characteristics. The third, kind of orange color, are carcass characteristics and gain characteristics, and then there's a few odd ones at the end there. And basically the way this table is set up, and hopefully it's familiar to most of you, is we've got, for example, here 2 bulls, bull A and bull B, with numbers associated with each of these different traits. And so if we look at that first trait, calving ease direct, basically what this says, if we look, bull A is a 10 and bull B is a 6. And so what that means is bull A should have 4% more unassisted births from first calf heifers than bull B. So in this case, a higher number is better for calving ease direct, because you're going to have more unassisted births. And I think this is a really important one, and one that we'll focus on quite a bit in this series, is that sometimes people really focus on birth weight, which is that second trait there, which is an indicator of the weight of the birth. And so in this particular case, comparing A and B, we'd expect bull B's calves would be an average of 1.5 pounds heavier at birth than bull A. But really the important trait when we're looking at this particular trait is whether or not the calving proceeds unassisted. And so while birth weight is an indicator of calving ease, it really doesn't tell the whole story. And calving ease is really the economically relevant trait. And you don't want to use both birth weight and calving ease to select heifer bulls, for example. You want to focus on that economically relevant trait, in this case of calving ease direct. And as you go down the definitions there, you can see weaning weight direct, and in this case, calves from bull B should average 2 pounds more on adjusted weaning weights than calves from bull A. Yearling height, milk is one here that's an important one. So what that says is that on average, daughters from bull A should produce calves that are about 5 pounds heavier, i.e. the difference between +3 and -2 at weaning. So it's not a measure of the pounds of milk that that animal produces, but rather the weight of the calf difference as a result of that. And milk is something that's important when you're selecting animals for potentially feed restricted environments. You want to be careful not to get that number too high because you might not have the resources to cope with a high number there. And then you can go down here, and I would encourage you, if you are unfamiliar with what these particular EPDs stand for, that fact sheet that I mentioned earlier on e-beef that's associated with EPDs has a definition of each of these different traits and explains what exactly is meant, for example, by, well, let's just pick one, carcass weight, for example. You can go through and get an explanation of what that actually means. And similarly, in that particular case, bull B should produce calves that have 18 pounds additional adjusted carcass weight relative to bull A. So that's just a kind of a brief overview, and hopefully is review for most people. And one of the things that I think is important to appreciate is the fact that these numbers, especially if you're working with young, low accuracy bulls, are the best estimate we have of the genetic merit of an animal, but they can change as more information comes in on that animal, or they get more phenotypes or more relatives information. And so that you can kind of get an estimate of that by, looking at this table. That's the accuracy and associated possible change table. In this particular case, I've gone and got this from the Angus Association. Each breed association will have an analogous table. And what this basically shows is that as you go from low accuracy bulls, that is bulls that maybe all you know is their pedigree information, through to very high accuracy bulls down the bottom here, they would be bulls that have information on maybe thousands of progeny. What that does, you see your accuracy improves, and so your potential change decreases. So if we look at this trait of calving ease direct, a very low accuracy bull has a calving ease direct possible change of 9.7. So it could go up or down 9.7 when you're looking at very low accuracy bulls. Whereas if you move down here to high accuracy bulls, 0.95 at the very bottom, then your possible change is only 0.5. In other words, your EPD is a very, very good accurate estimate of the true genetic merit of that animal, because he's proven himself by siring thousands of calves, and we've seen what his offspring looks like. And so for all of the traits, the production traits, the maternal traits, and the carcass traits, there are these associated possible changes. And so if we were having a look at those two bulls that we had in our EPD table scenario, and in the first table here, we're looking at very low accuracy bulls of 0.05, then you can basically say, well, bull A, the best estimate we have on his EPD for calving ease direct is 10, but there's a possible change of 9.7. And similarly, bull B, our best estimate is 6, but there's a lot of potential change there. And so although it's our best estimate, it might move when you're talking about a low accuracy bull. Whereas in the second trait table, I've picked out an accuracy of 0.9, and you can see in this case there's only a 1 pound potential change in calving at 1 unit point potential change in calving is direct, and so bull A is clearly going to remain genetically superior to bull B in this situation, because we have enough data to be very confident in that estimate of the genetic merit of that bull. And so that's just something to keep in mind with low accuracy bulls, and that's part of the reason we try and improve the accuracy using phenotypes, and Matt will discuss a little bit using genotype information to get genomically enhanced EPDs. So we're going to move now to the next poll. Bigger is always better when it comes to EPDs. So for those of you that might have joined late and don't know what we're doing here, basically what we're doing is polling the audience as to what they think whether this is a true or a false statement. In order to join, you want to text to the number 22333. You want to text the letters EPDS. You'll get a response saying you've joined the Cattlemen's conference, and then you can either text A or B depending upon whether you think this is a true or a false statement. So I see that the audience that's been online is speeding up and feeling more confident in their fake news spotting potential, which is very good. And so let's have a look and see what the results of this particular why did that go back is. So we got 97% say that's fake news, and they would be correct. And the reason is no, it really depends on the trait and the conditional on the needs of the ranch. And so, for example, you don't always want milk to be bigger. You don't always want height to be bigger. You want to keep that moderate if you keep retaining ownership on your cows. And so the bigger is always better is not true specifically in the case of EPDs. And one way to get a feel as to whether an animal you're looking at's EPD is particularly high or particularly low for your particular breed is to look at the percentile rank tables for your breed. And this is a slide that I've again taken from the Angus organization. And basically what this shows is the top 1% of bulls, or 2%, and you can go down here to the breed average, or down here. So for calving is direct, for example, the breed average is +6, and that's around about the 50 percentile rank, right? So that's as you might expect. So if you've got an animal you're looking for something in the top 10% of the breed, then you're looking for anything that's above or +12 or above. And if you've got a +17, that's the top 1% of the breed. And so these can give you some sort of a feel for where an animal you're looking at lies relative to the breed averages. And depending upon what you're selecting for and where your current battery of bulls are, it may be that you want to put a lot of selection emphasis on improving a particular EPD, and you'll go for maybe an animal that's very high in the breed average, whereas another trait you might be quite happy with and you just want to stay at the breed average because you've kind of got that at where you want that to be in your herd. And so the answer to that question is very nuanced depending upon where you are and which trait it is and what your environment is. And that's, I think, a really important overall message from this series, is to match the genetics to your environment and what your overall breeding objective and goals are. And so bigger, not always better. So the next slide, and I believe the last slide that I'm going to be talking about is this one, another potential fake news. And that is the best way to minimize calving problems in heifer bulls is to select for a low birth weight EPD. I'll give you guys a minute to key in here, and if people have just joined, you need to text EPDS to 22333. You'll get a ping back from NCBA saying you've joined the webinar, and then you can type in A or B to participate as part of this poll. and our experienced pollsters are getting up to speed, and I'm going to go ahead and reveal what the answer is here. And the good news is that 86% got this correct. It is fake news, and I already touched on this a little bit in my previous discussion, but carving ease is related. Carving ease direct is related to the level of carving ease. But if you're selecting for low birth weight, is this really what you're angling for? This is the smallest calf that was born. It's a 16-pound calf at birth, and so I don't think that's an ideal animal for most production systems. But really, what you're trying to do is to improve the percentage of your herd that has unassisted births, and that's what carving ease direct is a measure of. It's related to the level of assistance needed during a calving event. And while selection to decrease birth weight is an attempt to reduce calving problems, it doesn't have a direct revenue or source or cost associated with it back to the operation. It's really the unassisted births is the important economically relevant trait here. And the genetic correlation or the relationship between calving ease direct and birth weight is only between 0.6 or negative 0.6 and negative 0.8. In other words, birth weight only explains somewhere around about 36 to 64% of the genetic variation associated with calving ease direct. There are other things that contribute to that, to do with the likelihood of an unassisted birth that isn't covered or isn't accounted for in the predicted weight of the calf. And so really birth weight is what we call an indicator trait for calving ease direct. And you're kind of double counting, because calving ease direct already incorporates birth weight, but it also incorporates the other attributes that contribute to the likelihood of an unassisted birth. And so the bottom line there is to focus on calving ease direct if you're concerned about increasing the level of unassisted births in your herd. And sometimes, and I've seen this a lot, producers might set a threshold criteria for calving ease direct for their heifer bulls. So they're not going to take any bull that doesn't meet their particular selection criteria. So maybe I say that I want to only select the top 25% for calving ease direct, or a number of 10. And although this ensures a certain level of superiority for calving ease direct, it may exclude all of the bulls in the catalogue that are particularly good for the indexes or all the other traits that are economically important to the ranch. And in fact, its calving ease direct might be just 1 point lower, maybe 9. And I've shown you there's a fair degree of potential change associated with low accuracy young bulls, and you may kind of unfairly be penalizing an animal that is really a high indexing bull that would be well suited to the production system. And so depending upon the extent of calving problems in the herd, and also importantly, I find this a lot, is as the heifer bulls grow up, they then get heavier, they get taken off the heifers and go out and are part of the cow breeding herd. And if a lot of emphasis is placed on calving ease direct, that's usually not an issue in the cow herd. And so you've kind of used up a lot of selection emphasis on that one particular trait, and that's not really ideal. So having a look at what happens to that bull later is also an important thing to do. And I think at this stage, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Matt Spangler.
Great. Thank you, Alison. Well, if I can, there we go. So we'll go ahead and start off my section with another question for you, or statement. If an animal does not have a phenotypic record for a trait, it is still possible to produce an EPD for that trait for that animal. So if an animal is not recorded for a given trait, can we still produce an EPD for that animal for that trait? A would be true and B would be false. So once we get similar number of responses as what Alison was getting, we'll go ahead and go through why this may be true or why it may be false. Okay. So 83% said that if an animal does not have a phenotypic record, we can still produce an EPD for that trait for that animal. And I tend to agree with that. And there's two reasons. So one is the sharing of information between animals, so the relatedness between animals. Most of us think of traditional pedigree information as a way of tying together animals in the same population. You can think of it as the same breed, and certainly more recently, we've been able to use genomic data or DNA markers to refine the degree of relationship between animals. And so these relationships allow phenotypes that may be collected on one animal to help inform the genetic value or the EPD on a related animal. So think about parents and offspring. As a sire begins to have a lot of offspring, we actually learn about the genetic merit of that sire. And if you think about sex-limited traits, so something like heifer pregnancy, there's no way a bull is ever going to have a heifer pregnancy record himself. Yet they can have an EPD for heifer pregnancy. And really that's because of his half-sibling daughters or half-sibling females out there that have had the record, and certainly his daughters that go ahead and become pregnant as heifers or fail as heifers. And so those phenotypes inform his EPD. I will say that as the relationship decreases between animals, so does the amount of information that's shared. So as animals are more closely related, that sharing of phenotypic information is much stronger and informs EPDs in a more comprehensive way. The other way that this can occur is the sharing of information through correlated traits. So many traits have at least some degree of genetic correlation between them. So you can think about the relationship between very early growth traits like birth weight and weaning weight and their relationship to something like yearling weight, between moderate and strong genetic correlations between those traits. So as a consequence, we can get an EPD for yearling weight with reasonable accuracy by just having birth weight and weaning weight records because they're correlated to the trait of yearling weight. Also think about growth and feed intake. Feed intake records, although we're getting more and more of those across several beef breed organizations, still we rely a great deal on the genetic correlation between growth and feed intake to inform EPDs for dry matter intake on cattle that themselves have not gone through a feed intake testing facility. Similar to relationships between animals, if we think about just the relationships between traits, as the genetic correlation decreases between traits, so does the amount of information that's shared. So in Alison's example of calving ease and birth weight is actually a pretty good indicator of calving ease, although it certainly doesn't tell the whole story. I will say that accuracy is impacted if a phenotype is not recorded on an individual. So although EPD are possible without a phenotype on an individual, the accuracy of that resulting EPD can suffer. And so think about the very first estimate of genetic merit we have on an individual, and that's called a pedigree index EPD, which is really half of the sire EPD plus half the dam EPD. Relatively low accuracy, and in this case, the individual doesn't have a phenotype themselves. However, if we go back to the heifer pregnancy example, if an animal is a parent, so think of a bull, this lack of their own phenotypic record can be overcome in time with lots of recorded offspring. So on the next slide here, I've shown you a table, and it has two different measures of accuracy. I want you to focus on the BIF, or Beef Improvement Federation accuracy. That's the one we use here in the U.S. for beef cattle. And then I have three different heritability levels, 0.1, which would be low, 0.3, moderate, and 0.5, relatively high. And so point one, that may be like heifer pregnancy or sustained cow fertility or longevity. And for a bull to reach relatively high Beef Improvement Federation accuracy, he's going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of daughters with that phenotype recorded. So we can overcome that lack of a phenotype on an individual, but it can take a while to do it and can require quite a few offspring depending on the heritability level of the trait. All right, so this brings me to my next true-false. Milk EPD reports the difference of pounds of milk a bull's daughters will likely give as compared to the daughters of another bull. So Milk EPD reports difference of pounds of milk of a bull's daughters. So I see the responses are maybe rolling in a bit quicker than they were before. I don't know if you guys are becoming more comfortable with the technology or if it's getting late for those of you on the East Coast and you're wanting to roll through this. This, I'll tell you though, is a question that oftentimes I think beef cattle producers miss, and so we'll see how this audience does. And I know Alison gave you some clues earlier in her part of the presentation. All right, so over 75% of you said that was false, and that 75 or 77% of you is correct about that. We don't milk beef cows, at least by design. Some of you are saying, well, I've had to do that before, and I can empathize with you, but certainly we don't do that routinely and by design. Milk EPD is actually maternal weaning weight. So a bit of a misnomer, really, but that name came about because at one time it was thought that beef cattle producers could conceptualize that a bit better because the maternal weaning weight differences are largely attributable to differences in lactation potential of the cows. There are several traits that actually have what we call maternal genetic components. So there's an influence of the maternal genetics on the offspring. Classic examples are birth weight and calving ease. And so if you think about calving ease direct, like Alison spoke about, we also have EPDs for calving ease maternal, which is really related to how easily a bull's daughters will give birth during their first parity. Relative to maternal weaning weight or milk, I've often heard this described as unexplained growth. So whatever we can attribute to the individual, we just go ahead and assign that to the dam. And that's actually false. It's not unexplained growth. In the statistical models used to calculate weaning weight and milk EPDs, we're actually able to partition out the differences that are due to the animal's own genetic merit and that's due to the genetic merit of the dam. So again, like I said, generally this is attributable to differences in lactation potential. So how should you use a milk EPD? Well, tongue-in-cheek, carefully. So while weaning weight, both direct and maternal, is a source of revenue, maternal weaning weight or milk is also a source of cost. And cows with greater genetic potential for lactation need more nutrients just for maintenance. So even when they're dry, and that's because cows with more genetic potential for lactation have larger visceral organ weights, which can create energy sinks as we think about maintenance requirements. So caution really needs to be used when choosing bulls to produce daughters, particularly in limited feed environments. So I'd refer you back to the true-false question about bigger is not always better, which I think this group handled extremely well. So just a slide here to illustrate the effects of not only mature cow weight, which I think is intuitive to most of us, but also milk potential on energy requirements. And we go from 1,000 to 1,400 pound cows at maturity, and then change lactation or milk output at peak lactation from 10 pounds a day to 30 pounds a day. And you can see that not only does mature weight drive maintenance energy requirements, but lactation during lactation potential when she's milking, but also when she's dry, has a large effect on this. And so every breed publishes a milk EPD, which producers can use for those breeds that have economic indexes, those that are either all-purpose or more maternal in their design would have milk EPD included in them as well. I wanted to point your attention to further illustrate the economic impact, perhaps, of too much milk. This is a study from the early 1990s where cows were split into 3 groups based on their lactation, low, moderate, or high. And the investigators looked at the income generated from the calves, whether they were sold at weaning or slaughter, and then also the expense of the pair, whether the calves were sold at weaning or slaughter. And what I really want to draw your attention to are the numbers I have highlighted in green here, and that's economic efficiency. So a higher value would be more economically efficient. And regardless of the endpoint of the calves, the cows that were much more conservative in their lactation were more economically efficient. So I think this drives home the point that when we think about sire selection, putting together breeding programs, it's just not the revenue piece that we need to concern ourselves with. We really need to think about profit, which obviously includes both income and expense. All right, so my next question, submitting a 50K genotype. So genotyping an animal with really any genotyping platform that'll be included into their EPDs, but let's use a 50K here. Submitting a 50K genotype to the Breed Association will always increase a young bull's EPDs. Some people on the line probably have had this experience practically, have done genotyping. Others perhaps have not. So I'm curious what the group thinks. If I genotype an animal and submit that genotype to a beef breed organization for inclusion in national cattle evaluation, will that always increase their EPDs? All right, we'll let maybe a couple more responses come in here. All right. So 85% roughly said no, and that's good. They're actually correct. That the reality is they can't all go up. So you need to think about genomic information as just another source of information that allows us to refine the estimates of EPDs. And so akin to getting more progeny information on a young bull, their EPD can move up or down. But what will increase is the accuracy of our estimate of that EPD. So some evaluations, what I'd like to point out here, the American Hereford Association, who released a new evaluation in December using what we call a single-step genomic evaluation that utilizes what's called BOLT software, which has been highly publicized for a long time. The IGS, or International Genetic Solutions Group, relatively soon should be releasing their evaluation using the BOLT software. And the reason I highlight this is because even though the EPDs are informed with genomics in a better way than they have been in the past, the accuracy values will actually look lower than they had in previous genetic evaluations. And this is simply related to the fact of the way accuracy is being calculated through those evaluations. So you can think about it as getting more accurate accuracies. And so because of that, they're going to appear to be slightly lower, even though in reality the EPDs are improved and are actually more reliable. So just to kind of show simplistically the different sources of information that can enter into an EPD and on average how it might increase the accuracy. We start off with a pedigree estimate that's having really nothing more known than who the sire and dam are. We can get a large jump in accuracy after we include an individual's own phenotypic record. We can also get a big jump if we've genotyped that animal. If the animal has been genotyped and also has a phenotypic record themselves, we don't get a doubling of these two, right? We get a slight gain over either one of them. And then as an animal becomes a parent in a registered setting and begins to accumulate offspring, we can see the accuracy continue to rise. So just a couple quick charts that show the impact of accuracy when we do genotype. This bar chart here shows if we genotyped with a panel of markers that might explain about 10% of the genetic differences between animals. The dark gray bars are the accuracy of the EPD before we genotyped them, and the light gray is the increase in the accuracy after we genotyped them. So you can see, I think by today's standards, this kind of panel wouldn't be considered very good. And we only get benefits if we really knew very little about the animal to begin with. That being said, if you think about perhaps a trait like disease susceptibility, where we don't have EPDs, and this may be the only source of information to generate an EPD from, I still think that that kind of prediction would be better than nothing. Now, if we go to a case where we explain maybe 40% of the genetic differences between animals, which would be akin to a BIF accuracy of about 0.3, now you can see that we do get fairly sizable jumps in accuracy, particularly for those young animals that have not yet become parents. So this is really the benefit of genotyping, is increasing the accuracy, and admittedly the EPD itself may move in a favorable or unfavorable direction. Many of you know that the American Angus Association themselves made a large change to their genetic evaluation in the summer of 2017. And so they moved also to a single-step method of including genomic information into their national cattle evaluation. And the way genomics is being accounted for there is a means of refining our estimates of the relationship between animals. So instead of just having pedigree, we're actually able to use DNA markers to be able to determine the relationship between animals. So this is actually real data. It's actually swine data, but the concept still holds true. The average relationship between one of your grandparents and yourself is 0.25. But the reality is that that can vary between 0 and 0.5, assuming we don't have a lot of inbreeding. And I don't know everyone on the phone, so I'll just make the assumption that we don't. Now, if I have 0 relationship genomically to a grandparent that happened to be very good for a particular trait, that may explain why I don't resemble that grandparent in my genetic prediction or EPD for that given trait. So the reality is, and a large benefit of genomic information now is really being able to refine those genetic relationships between individuals, and because of that, we're able to enhance the accuracy of our EPDs. So here's a nice example actually from the Kansas State University bull sale catalog from their 2017 sale. They had these 2 bulls on offer, lots 21 and 23. They were actually flush mates. So if you look at their EPDs for calving age direct, weaning weight, yearling weight, and scrotal circumference, calving age maternal, milk, and so on, you'll actually see that they're identical. And they're identical because their own phenotypes for those particular early growth traits and the traits that have a substantial maternal component to them weren't included into their EPDs. But Kansas State, like a good university and a good seed stock producer should, went in and actually did genotyping on the bulls they had on offer in that sale. And once they got the results back, you can see the revised EPDs for lots 21 and 23 on the right-hand side of your slide. Those two bulls separated quite a bit. Lot 21 moved up for calving ease direct, and lot 23 moved down quite a bit for calving ease direct. And so initially, both of those bulls appeared the same, above average for growth, above average for calving ease direct, and then all of a sudden they separated themselves quite a bit. Lot 23, maybe not the ideal choice for heifers, but has more growth. Lot 21, obviously, then a very safe choice for heifers. So I think a benefit there, a nice illustration of how genomic information could take a pair of individuals which are flush mates and actually begin to partition out the differences between them. All right, so I believe my last question here, bulls with higher EPD accuracy will have more uniform groups of offspring. True or false? So does EPD accuracy give us insight into how uniform the offspring will actually be from a given bull? All right, I'll give you just a few more seconds here to get your answer in. And let's see. All right, so about 50-50. We're split on this one. And I think in terms particularly of accuracy, but probably EPDs in general, this is one of the most understood ones. So accuracy is not the same thing as precision. Accuracy of a bull's EPD does not tell us anything about how uniform his offspring group is going to be. Accuracy gives us a measure of how closely related the EPD, our prediction of their genetic merit, is to their true progeny difference, their true genetic merit as a parent. This phenomenon of Mendelian sampling, so the fact that when a mating is made, a bull passes on a random half of their alleles to the next generation. Because of that, there's differences in what offspring of a given bull receive, and that creates variation in a bull's progeny. Variation isn't a bad thing. So particularly if you're a seed stock producer, if all the offspring were exactly the same, we wouldn't be able to make any kind of genetic change. So here's a pictorial representation that goes through the differences between accuracy and precision. So if you look at the top left, we have low accuracy, low precision. So that's me at the beginning of rifle season, trying to get sighted in. We move to the upper right. We've got low accuracy, so we're completely missing the bullseye, but our shots are right on top of each other. So we've got high precision. We look at the lower left, we've got high accuracy, we're around the bullseye, but low precision. And then in the lower right, we've got high accuracy and high precision. So let's think about that in the context of genetic prediction. This is a slide actually courtesy of Dorian Garrick. So let's think about these three animals here. We go across the genome and we can assign, perhaps using genomic data, the effect of each allele on a given trait. And really what an EPD is conceptually is we're taking into account all of the DNA markers or all the causal variants that impact a given trait across the genome. We sum those up, and that's an estimated breeding value. That's their genetic merit as an individual. An EPD is half of an estimated breeding value, which is their genetic merit as a parent, because they only pass on half of their genetic material. So from this, we can clearly see if we wanted this trait to be higher, that the first animal has the better genetic merit as a parent. But because of Mendelian sampling, you could envision that perhaps in a mating, they pass on their unfavorable alleles, so the -2, the -3, the -4, to an animal, and then the next calf they happen to pass on all the favorable ones just by chance. And because of that, that's going to create differences in the offspring that they have. But the accuracy that actually we report with EPDs is how confident are we in the cumulative effect of their genetics across the genome. So those are really two different things. If you want to increase the uniformity of your calf crop and you're using multiple bulls, the best way to increase uniformity is to select those bulls to be very similar in terms of the EPDs for the traits that you're interested in. That's the best way to try to increase uniformity genetically. So I'd encourage you to tune in to the rest of the series. EPDs are only one tool in the toolbox. And so throughout this series, we're going to go through developing crossbreeding programs and the benefits of doing so, particularly if you're a commercial rancher. Sire selection obviously requires focusing on more than one trait. So how do you practice multiple trait selection? And so we'll cover the use of economic selection indices. Talked a little bit about genomic information now. That can certainly speed up the rate of genetic gain when we include that into EPDs. We'll be able to look at some scenarios at the end of this series that are real-world bull buying scenarios. And so how do you put all this information together to actually make informed selections if you're going out to buy bulls this spring? With that, certainly like to acknowledge funding from these sources for eBeef, and like to put in a last and final plug for those of you that have not yet visited the eBeef website to please do so. We'd certainly encourage any constructive criticism that you guys might have, or if you see some educational source that would be beneficial that we've missed, we'd certainly like to know that as well.
Thank you, Matt. I want to thank both of our presenters tonight for a very informative session. NCBA is all about delivering valuable content to our members in the industry, and the eBeef team has certainly helped us achieve that goal tonight. As we move into our question and answer session, I want to take a moment and invite everyone to the upcoming Cattle Industry Convention being held January 31st through February 2nd in Phoenix. It's not too late to register, and if you do, plan to come early and participate in Cattlemen's College Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday, where you can participate in outstanding educational sessions. The entire convention provides a great opportunity to hear more in-depth information on current issues and challenges in the cattle industry, and will help chart the course of our future. And don't forget to sign up for the next webinar in this series. Show me the money. Are the EPDs for profit? Registration will open tomorrow, January 19th at ncba.org. Now let's go to our questions. Thank you again for taking your time tonight and for participating in the webinar.
Thank you, Craig. This is Jesse Fulton with NCBA here in the Denver office, and if you would like to ask one of our presenters a question, just chat into the box on your control panel and we'll ask away. Already got some questions rolling in here, so the first one's for Dr. Van Eenennam. When will a bull hit the market that produces only female dairy semen, aka Holstein, and only male beef semen, for instance, Angus?
So I'm guessing someone must have read MIT review article that came out last week. And so kudos for being up on that. So the question, I think, is about a project that I'm involved with gene editing, where we're trying to, there's actually a single gene that's associated with determining maleness, and we're trying to move that gene onto the X chromosome of a bull so that he'll either provide his offspring with a Y chromosome, which would make them male by definition, and then the X chromosome with this gene called SRY, which would also make those animals male. And so that's a very much at a research phase at this time, and we we hypothesize that animal would produce all males. We don't even know that's the case. It's true in mice, but sometimes cows aren't mice. And so that's relatively a simple approach. I guess it's not simple, but it's easier than making all female offspring in mammals, because there's not an analogous approach to make a bull that only produces X or only produces females. There are a couple of approaches that you could try. One of them, of course, is sex sorting semen, which is maybe the cheats way of doing it. There are some other genetic approaches, but really a lot of this is futuristically thinking, because we're going to need to sort out the regulatory issues associated with genome editing before any of this is likely to be available in the field. And so stay tuned. We hope that type of a technology is likely to come along, I would say, in the next decade, like reduced to practice and available, if we can get the regulatory to be risk-based and sensible.
All right. Matt, if you could go back to one topic you touched on, and can you revisit about how an EPD is possible without phenotype measured on an individual?
Yeah, you bet. So two ways, really. If we have particularly close relatives of that individual that have that particular phenotype measured, then because of those relationships, that helps us inform the genetic merit of the individual that's lacking the phenotype. So think about, and I really like the example of a sex-limited trait like heifer pregnancy. A bull himself can't have a heifer pregnancy record, but he could have daughters that do. And so how those daughters compare to their contemporaries, i.e. Daughters of other bulls, informs about the genetic merit of their sire. So that's one way. The other way is through the genetic relationship between traits. So in example, if we think about dry matter intake, if an animal does not have a dry matter intake themselves, but we know that post-weaning gain is correlated to dry matter intake, we can get a prediction for dry matter intake EPD for that animal. Not having a phenotype on the individual, though, does come with a sacrifice of accuracy, particularly early on. Hopefully that clears it up. If not, though, that person can feel free to shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to go through it in more detail.
Alrighty. This question, I'm not really sure who this one goes to, but what are your thoughts on genetic evaluation versus ultrasound evaluations? There's a lot of discussion on each method and versus each other.
So I might take a first stab at that, and I'm going to perhaps interpret that in a different way. I think I'm going to interpret it as collecting ultrasound information versus genotyping, because I have received that question before. So one important thing to understand is that genotyping and the genomic enhanced EPDs we have still very much rely on phenotypes. So even though we're genotyping, we can't do away with collecting phenotypes. And that goes for all kinds of traits, and certainly ultrasound is one of them. Now, that being said, I think there are some places where we need to do a better job in our seed stock genetic evaluations, getting more actual carcass data, ensuring we genotype females that themselves are the ones that have the heifer pregnancy and the stayability records, because it's important to have the animals with the phenotypes also genotyped. So I guess my point is one doesn't replace the other.
Alison, would you like to add anything?
No, I mean, I think, Matt covered it, and I mean, ultrasound is basically goes into the genetic evaluation, and without the phenotype, the way it was originally worded, that question was, should you do ultrasound or should you do genetic evaluation? And it's kind of like, well, one's the phenotype that informs the EPD, and so Matt interpreted it differently to kind of make it I guess, a question to do with genotyping, but you have to have the ultrasound go into the EPD in order to be able to, into the genetic evaluation in order to get an EPD for the carcass trait. So they're kind of related and linked to each other.
Alrighty. So what if a producer is recording his heifer to bull ratio within a year from a certain bull in their herd? Doing these genetic evals on the herd for the past 5 years with parentage included, can you determine what the heifer to bull calf ratio might be in the future?
Bull ratio. I guess I'm not 100% sure I got the question. So could
you?
So
based on if they're keeping track of how many heifer calves they're having, how many bull calves they're having from a certain bull, and they're recording that for the a time period, let's say up to 5 years, will they be able to give an estimate of how many, what ratio they'll come out to and predict how many heifers to bulls they could have within a breeding calf season?
Yeah. Okay, now I've got this, and I think, was it Henry VIII that chopped off his wife's head when she kept giving him girl children? So really, every time that an insemination happens, there's just a random chance of being male or female, and sometimes you have runs of different genders, but on average, it's going to be 50-50. And so I think the suggestion there is that maybe there's a bull that's, it seems like he has a greater than normal number of heifers or a greater than normal number of bull calves. And I just don't think that, other than the genetic approach that was addressed in a couple of questions ago, I think that's just stochastic, dumb luck. So sometimes you throw a penny and you get 20 heads in a row, and it's like, is that a rigged penny? And it's just, sometimes you'll get that that sampling will occur, that it'll be improbable, but it's not going to be predictive of the next, irrespective the next time that bull has a calf, the chances of it being male or female is still 50-50. So there's it's, you can't predict.
Yeah, the producer actually responded and said that that's what they experience, is 50-50 on average. So great to hear.
I personally, I have 2 sons, so I don't know, just saying. I guess that I only produce males.
All right. One question is what about a commercial rancher? Can EPDs eventually be developed for the commercial rancher? And if not, how should they be utilizing the EPDs from seed stock?
So the first part of that question is yes. So developing EPDs really requires being able to truly account for the relationships between animals. Traditionally, we think about that as pedigree. Now it can also be informed using genomic information, and then also collecting phenotypes. So if a commercial producer, and there are programs by breed associations out there, well, they will take commercial data and actually use it to develop EPDs for that commercial cattle producer. And there are different programs with different fee structures. So it's possible. It's just a commitment of collecting the phenotypes, to use multi-sire pastures, doing parentage testing, and recording all of that information and sending it off to an organization that will run genetic evaluation. So it's very much possible. The question is, what is the benefit to them? One benefit is if they collect, let's say, a lot of fertility-related phenotypes, maybe they're getting carcass data on calves, things that maybe are missing some in our seed stock sector. That really helps inform EPDs on bulls they may buy in the future, and allows them to really enhance that evaluation and take advantage of bulls with more accurate EPDs.
Alrighty. When we were talking about getting some genetic information on these animals, what about for a producer, what decision should he make between going with a private genetic evaluation group versus a breed-specific evaluation for a commercial producer?
I don't hear Alison jumping in right away.
Yeah, well, I'll let you take it, Matt.
Yeah, so the downside of a genetic evaluation run by an entity outside of a breed association is really the inability to directly compare those EPDs to anything that's outside of that private entity's population. So although for many breeds we can't directly compare EPDs across breed, we do have cross-breed EPD adjustment factors from the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, but that really wouldn't be possible if an organization by themselves, they create their own EPD base, and so it's not comparable then. So I think that's an immediate downside is that inability to compare across populations. That being said, though, I think it boils down to what are the objectives of that commercial bull buyer? Does that entity produce bulls that meet their needs in terms of the breed type, breed composition, and the traits that they've emphasized in seed stock production?
Alrighty. Another question that's come in is a producer has recently selected an AI sire to use in their herd AI program because he had high accuracy for most of his traits. However, when the most recent EPDs were published by the Breed Association, there were drastic changes in some of his EPDs with very little change in their accuracy. How can this happen?
So I want to make.
I don't know.
Go ahead, Alison.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, you go ahead, Matt. I guess.
So I want to make sure I understand. So big changes in EPDs of some bulls, but very little change in accuracy. That's the crux of it, Jesse.
Yep. Changes in the EPD numbers, but the accuracy remained the same.
Yeah. So it would be helpful to know what breed it was. As I mentioned before, Hereford, who went live with a single-step genomic evaluation in December, because of that change in the way accuracy is calculated, or one could say was approximated before, truly calculated now. That makes, although EPDs shifted and became more accurate, that our accuracy values actually shrunk. So that's one possible way. Another way, if it was an example, Angus, there certainly was some shifting, and that was related to different degrees of relationship between animals, and that necessarily would not have changed accuracy because the same amount of information was there before. So although those kinds of shifts were not terribly common, they certainly did happen, and depending on the breed, that's one or two reasons why that could have happened.
I'm guessing that was probably as a breed association moved over to single step, that there might have been a little bit of movement, and because they're evaluating it a different way, and so that's kind of a one-off thing that can happen when you shift from one breed of evaluation methodology to another. And I know probably it's a little bit like when you genotype an animal, some go up and some go down. Well, that's probably a little bit of that reordering, re-ranking happened as breed associations implemented the single-step genetic evaluation and changed over to that.
Alrighty. This question piqued my interest a little bit, being a meat scientist. How long before you think we will have a reliable EPD for tenderness, beef tenderness?
Well, I'll jump in. So obviously we need phenotypes to be able to develop EPDs. And if that's not routinely being collected as part of genetic evaluations, then there's no way to develop EPDs. So I think that if you don't measure it, you can't get an EPD for it. And so that's, I guess, my response. Matt, I don't know if you want to say something.
No, I agree. If we want EPDs, Alison, we've got to measure the trait, and I think that one could benefit a great deal from being able to measure tenderness, in plant at chain speed. Would greatly help that.
All righty, I think one last question here. Matt, I think this one might be directed towards you. So with what you were covering with the K-State bulls, but if you have a bull that is cloned, why would you have different EPDs than that of an original bull? And so I think you might need to revisit that scenario.
Yeah, well, the clones is an interesting question, and part of where that can arise is the different amounts or sources of information that come in to actually predicting that animal's genetic merit. So I can think of an extreme case. Let's say I had a cloned bull. One's registered with the American Angus Association, one with the American Simmental Association, and they have different groups of calves coming in on them. So we have really different estimates of their genetic merit. I could think of that as a potential cause of that.
And I just like to, yeah, I just want to pipe in and say, just to be clear, those two K-State bulls were flush brothers, i.e. full siblings. They weren't clones. Exactly. Yeah. So in the case of clones, however, and I know I'm familiar with some examples in the dairy industry where they've actually registered clones, and their PTAs in that particular situation were slightly different, and it's because their measurements on their own production and the daughters they have will have slightly different records, which can slightly alter their estimate of their true predicted transmitting ability. That, as it's always an estimate, it's an EPD, it's an estimated progeny difference, and so if you don't have exactly, even though in this case they should have the same estimate, because we don't have perfect information and we're not 100% accurate, you'll get a little bit of wobble, and so they won't be necessarily exactly the same. And that's what happened with those clones in the Holstein Association.
All right, I think we're actually out of time for questions. For those of you who are still on that have questions that we did not get to, we'll be taking these questions and sending them to our presenters, and we have your email information from where you registered, and they will be able to respond to your questions. Just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded. The recording will be available probably late tomorrow evening. And if you wouldn't mind, please stay on and fill out the short survey at the end of this. That survey helps us generate material for our future webinars. We'd like to know what you want to hear and put those together. So with that, I would like to thank our presenters for being on with us, and thank you for joining us tonight, the attendees that were able to get on. With that, I'll end the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.